Welcome everyone to Raise the Roof. Today is part 5 in our 6-part series through James Sire's classic book, The Universe Next Door, a Basic Worldview Catalog. This episode features a conversation with my friend Monique Duson on Postmodernism and Islamic Theism. But before we dive in, don't forget to follow and rate the show on your favorite podcasting service. And remember, if you want to participate with me in a subscribers-only question and answer, you can sign up through my website, morethancake.org. So with that, I'll turn it over to Monique and let her get things started.
Welcome to today's conversation. It's our Worldview series. This is Worldview series part 5. We have one more week to go. Today's conversation is going to be on postmodernism and Islamic theism and how those two worldviews are showing up in our current reality and how they have an impact on race. But before we even answer those questions, we want to find out just a little bit about what they are. Can you give us a 30,000-foot glimpse as to what postmodernism is?
So postmodernism, it's a form of naturalism, and as Sire points out in the book, started as a language movement, you might say. It started in the realm of language. In other words, do words really have meaning? Is there meaning embedded in the language, or is this something that the person who reads gives it? Do we give words the meaning? So it really started as a critique of language itself, and then it sort of blossomed into its own sort of perspective or lens on the world. There is no God guiding us. It still puts humans at the center. Now we're just arguing about, inside of that broader worldview, what do I count as truth? What do I accept as a fact or my reality? And so postmodernism allows us to get to two different kinds of truth, the sort of the my truth kind of subjectivism. But there's also a cultural or a synthetic truth that comes into play as acceptable. So society can determine what's right or wrong. Or in the case of when we get to like critical theories, those sort of things, the neo-Marxism, my tribe decides what's right. So my group of people, however I want to define my group of the oppressed, will define what is right or wrong. So there's this blending that crosses over, but there's certainly no absolute truth. And even the truths of science and observation, I think, get rejected in postmodernism too. We see that playing out in certain groups where they'll say, Western science is a form of white supremacy. We've seen that within the neo-Marxist sort of blend of postmodernism that Sire gets into, a little bit of the Marxist side of things. Science is a form of oppression because it claims that there is something objectively true. So it really wants to get rid of objective truth in any sense. Certainly it already got rid of absolute, but now it wants to get rid of any sort of objective facts. And then it ends up in a mess.
The first part of that is getting rid of any kind of objective truth. So what does postmodernism see as truth? Like, how do we know truth? What is the prime reality? How do we get there?
Yeah, prime reality, similar to where we get in existentialism, is human either individuals or groups. And where you draw the line between individuals or groups are where you're going to get your distinctive approaches of postmodernism. So the prime reality is my experience or my perspective, the meaning I give to the world ends up being, I think, that prime reality.
Yes, I think that's in real time where we see things of my truth as, that has been floating around culture for the last few years, or even things like microaggressions, like the understanding that I know when something's racist, I know when it's happening, but you don't know when it's happening because there's a truth that's available to me. It is my truth, and it doesn't necessarily sit in the realm of objective truth.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter your intents. You could your intentions, right? You could literally say, hey, well, I didn't mean any offense by that. Or if you say to somebody, hey, you're not from around here, where are you from? And they think, oh, are you asking me that? If I'm asking you that, are you saying that because I'm black? You think all blacks are from Africa? Well, wait a second. Are you thinking that I'm thinking that only because you're looking at me as a white person? You think all white people think that all black people are from? It's like, we can go back and forth, but it doesn't matter what I intended. I might have just said it because I saw, we were at the airport and I saw a luggage tag from Sweden or something. And I thought, oh, well, we're at an international airport. Maybe she was just there. But no, if you can if you take it that way, it becomes truth, right? So the perspective of the oppressed, when we get to the critical theory type issues, becomes truth, regardless of my intent. So I don't give meaning to my words. You give meaning to my words. That's where that postmodern kind of idea sort of, I think, seeps into. Where does the meaning come from? The meaning comes from the subjective sense of I, but whose subjective truth ends up being truth? Well, there again, that's what we're going to decide. Whose subjective truth becomes the operating truth that we're going to live by.
Yeah, so the idea of crime reality and truth itself and the way we know things is subjective to the individual, not objective.
Yeah.
Correct?
Or subjective to the group. Just depends.
So it's either...
It's a blend.
An objective, or not objective, like a subjective me in my experience and my truth, or the collective experience of the group and the truth that is available and known among the group, but it's never an objective, or I won't say never, I'll say it's rarely an objective reality.
Yeah.
Cool. So then how would postmodernists see the human person? Like where do, we get our dignity, value, and worth from? In the postmodernistic framework, is there dignity, value, and worth to the individual at all?
Yeah. So here again, you can have a lot of different answers depending on who you're talking with. And I think this is what Sire tries to make that clear, right? Because there isn't one postmodern worldview, so to speak, right? It really might depend. So I think it's easier to sometimes give examples of this. Because postmodernism falls within naturalism, we know that chance plus time produced our reality, right? We're not, there's no designer, there's no purposer that gives us purpose. There's no designer who gives us created design or a sense of mission or identity, or in the Christian sense, human sacredness, right? So that doesn't exist. We're just chemicals stuff. We're in process. So they definitely start with that idea within that naturalistic framework. But then, so where does value come from? Well, if you want to lean on the individual side, I can give myself value because I believe I am. I think you saw this really big in the 80s and 90s with the self-esteem movement. Well, just believe you can be something and you can become it. If you can dream it, you can achieve it kind of thing. And I think that's the more the self was the center of that. I see some smiles. You recognize that, right? Reading Rainbow. I don't know. That's the song.
No, I was thinking Reading Rainbow.
I don't know. The song came to my head. I don't know why. That's actually later.
Is it Whitney Houston? If I just believe.
Oh, yeah.
Then no, is that Whitney? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
No, it's not. What am I thinking? Whitney Houston. It's R. Kelly. I believe I can fly.
Okay. I believe I can fly. I believe I can touch the sky.
We are way off track.
Think about it every night and day. You can get that part out later. All right. I'm back now. Okay. Yeah, see, you said it. Now I had to do it. So, yeah, but I think that's where we were, 80s, 90s, the sort of thing. And then I think as more the critical theories kind of took hold within the educational system, human value gets tied to the tribe, to your group, to your whatever that tribe is described at, right? So if you're the lesbians, then you have an identity and a value that comes from that identity. So identity, the intersectional identity of I'm a minority of this group or I'm a minority of that group, whatever it is, those tribalistic identities, those give you meaning, purpose, and value. And if you go outside those lines, then of course you lose meaning and purpose, identity, because value comes from identifying with a certain group of people. So I think that's what we're left with within the postmodern framework. And again, it's just a matter of who's drawing the lines, and do they emphasize the personal over the communal or the communal over the personal? And that's where it gets really muddy.
On page T15, it says that existence precedes essence. We make ourselves by what we do. The I is an activity, the postmodern pundit says. And just thinking about human people and what we choose and how we can choose to be, all of that is currently, just the water that we're swimming in. It's my choice, my body, my choice. So I choose who I'm going to be. At this, within this framework, a lot of it becomes performative.
Yes.
Even. in looking at, this is who I am by the things that I do.
Yeah. Doing is becoming is an easy way to think about that. You do to become. The more action, when you take action, you become something. Which is weird because for many people, they say who I am is not my actions, right? We see that all the time where you watch shows like I used to watch The Bachelor all the time with my wife, and just to mostly make fun of the beautiful people whose life was miserable. It made me feel better about myself. I mean, if beautiful people can suffer, then maybe my life is not so terrible, But so we'd watch it. Somebody get drunk the night before, they do something stupid, or they come up the next day, well, that's not me. Oh, well, you know what you said to him. Oh, no, you didn't. And, oh, well, that wasn't me. So it's weird because you get this sort of sense doing is being. Your actions determine your reality. But then other groups of people want to take it the exact opposite. Who I am, who I self-identify as, has nothing to do with my actions. I'm independent of my actions. The free sort of sex mentality. I can go and I can choose to treat my body anyway, but it doesn't matter because that doesn't touch on the real me. So it's really weird in that sense. We can have both things coexisting. And it's why we have so many problems culturally getting along with people, because postmodern allows both things to exist at the same time, and there's no way to decide who's actually right or wrong.
Yeah. In postmodernism, we get the phrase good without God. Mm-hmm. And is the good without God because of its naturalistic tendencies? Like it's bent in naturalism. So because it's bent in naturalism and just more of the natural law, with a focus on humans and how humans do or be from one another, we can be good for each other, but I don't need a God to do that.
Yeah, though God is necessary because you don't believe one exists anyway. And so I think you get this there's a strong current within postmodernism that will lead us to that ethical place of, as long as you choose, it is right. The good is in not being able to choose. As long as you can choose, that becomes the moral good, the power to choose. This is where we get phrases like, my body, my choice. Mm-hmm. My ability to choose is what makes an action itself morally good. If you inhibit my ability to choose, then that is bad. That's morally wrong. So again, this is why the class type distinction is important, because the oppressor is said to inhibit somebody's ability to choose something. So all laws are a form of oppression, right? Because laws tell me what I can't do. But if I want to do it, I should be able to do it, because that in and of it, the choice and the power to do anything is itself what determines what is morally right or good. So that's a strong current within that postmodern stream, right? Now, not everybody wants to draw lines differently. They'll say, well, I wouldn't believe it this way or whatever. But in truth, we're sort of arguing around the edges, where we get cut up along the banks, but that's the river we're swimming in.
What would postmodernists say about history? Because what I see in the critical theories is that that history really is a cyclical contest. It's kind of a never-ending circle of who's going to be on top and who's going to be on the bottom, who's going to be the oppressor, who's going to be the oppressor today, tomorrow, next year, next millennia, whatever. Is that something that's unique to the critical social theories, or is that an aspect of postmodernism that then bleeds into the critical social theories?
Yeah, so maybe there's a good point to kind of point out. So Sire, he in this chapter cites a lot of critical theorists, Michel Foucault, I just like to say his name. He cites several of those guys who are neo-Marxists, sort of Marxist in their leaning, critical theorists, in that world. They swim in that sort of stream, right? And he sort of deals with these as postmodernists. And they were because of the way they dealt with language, but they were also unique in because of their Marxist sort of solutions to the situations like history. How do we approach history? So I sort of personally would rather see Marxism not as an extension of postmodernism, but as sort of another version of secular existentialism that does a lot of trade-offs with postmodern thinking. I think they're swap and spit, right? If they're kissing cousins, they're swap and spit a lot, right? They're sharing a lot of ideas, they're sharing a lot of DNA, but they are unique in that sense. That being understood, I think they're trying to say that there is a repetitive nature to the history, but there is a sort of arc of time towards some greater purpose. For them, it's that Marxist utopia. So they take that Hegelian sort of dialectic. You start with thesis, then antithesis, then synthesis, right? You start off with an idea, somebody has a counter idea. The counter idea is neither good nor bad. What makes it good is that it's counter to the original thing. And then where the good comes is that both that becomes, you synthesize that and you come up with a new idea. Well, that's new idea is good until you come up with the new antithesis, and then that changes that one, that becomes the good. So there is no objective right or wrong. It is cyclical in the nature of you're repeating a lot of the same things, but the ideal of Marxism would be that you're eventually, I think it's sort of like a spiral, right? You're spiraling around, eventually you get closer and closer to the ultimate goal, but the spiral gets tighter. So it's not a pure circle, you're going back and forth repeating, it's more like a spiral where you're getting tighter and tighter, closer in, eventually we'll get to the ultimate state of utopia that we dream of achieving.
I think that's helpful, especially in looking at it maybe more of like a cone, like a funnel, kind of going down into that tighter spin.
Yeah, like that game that they play at the fair, you put in the coin and it goes around that little thing and it spirals, but eventually it goes into the hole, right? I prefer to think of Marxism, though, as the toilet water. The water goes around and around and around, but eventually it goes down the drain. The sewer's where it belongs.
Well, that's where it leads.
I'm going to get hate mail. Send all your mail to Monique at the Center for...
I feel like in this chapter, before I even say that, I feel like in this chapter, the chapter on postmodernism is really just a chapter kind of outline Marxism. Would you agree with that?
I felt like he leaned into the Marxist side. I mean, a lot of the thinkers, like I said earlier, he quotes a lot of Marxist, neo-Marxist kind of thinkers. So he tends to sort of define postmodernism by Marxism or neo-Marxism. And I get why, because again, there's a lot of exchanging of ideas, but it makes more sense for the Center for Biblical Unity, the things we've dealt with over a bunch of years, to kind of make a more clear distinction between postmodernism and versus Marxism and critical theories themselves.
Yeah, I do agree. What would you say are some of the distinctives between those things?
I think personally the biggest distinction comes down to what defines what is true and what is morally good. So I think postmodernism generally embraces just the subjective, like the sort of my truth, and the synthetic sort of cultural truths. And within those two camps, people are fighting about but that's truth, all within the culture or within the self, right? That's postmodernism. I think Marxism makes a different claim historically. Marxism accepts the contingent truths of observational sciences, because Marxism is steeped in a sort of, it sees itself as a scientific process, it's pulling from the sort of modernist lens, the trust in reason to kind of get us somewhere to some degree. It paints itself as a science in some way. So it accepts the sort of observational truths as directive, but then it also accepts the synthetic. I think Marxism rejects the my truth category. So I see them as very different in that sense. I think it privileges the synthetic and then the scientific as the ways of refining from the thesis to the antithesis to the synthesis. I think the crossover that Sire is seeing is they both look at the synthetic sort of cultural truths as giving guidance, but I think ultimately Marxism has to reject the individual. And I think that makes sense when you look at critical theories, if we can, because critical theory, comes out of Marxism, but it does reject the subjective. So think about this. We've used this example before because it's relevant. So Monique, you are, as a Black female, a part of the oppressed class, according to the intersectional hierarchy, right? Mm-hmm. But if you, Monique, say, well, I reject that classification, I'm a Christian, and I think that there is truth, it's objective, you're not thinking Black. Or you're the black face of white supremacy, kind of. Yeah, right? You get called all the names. I have my white liberal friends that they are fine calling them Uncle Toms.
Oh, yeah.
Because they don't see it as them being racist. So that makes more sense in the critical theory framework because they reject the my truth. It doesn't matter what you as an individual think, Monique. It matters that your individual views align with the tribe that you have been assigned. So that synthetic truth has to become your truth. The group consensus must be your view. That must be the way you see yourself. Whereas postmodernists would still value well, that's my truth, and I don't have to align with the group because I can still value that. So I think that's why we see the actual conflict between postmodernism and Marxism as they play themselves out. They're battling each other because they're agreeing about the synthesis, the cultural truths, but they're either rejecting the scientific on the side of postmodernism, or they're accepting or they're rejecting the subjective on the side of the Marxist side.
See, and and maybe this is like the neo-Marxist or like the new modern Marxist, but I do see Marxists as embracing my truth. Now, I do think that that's probably not in the most orthodox vein of Marxism. Marcuse or what's his name, any of the original Frankfurt School may not have held to that, but take a Patrisse Cullors from BLM.
Yeah.
Who says she's a Marxist. Her whole platform has to be based on my truth to some degree. It has to be infiltrated by a my truth kind of
there is until you're
there.
Yeah, but once your my truth conflicts with the group truth, then you're rejected, right? Even for Patrisse Cullors, right? So if you, Monique, don't accept what she says her truth is because you're not aligning with, your tribe of people, then your truth gets rejected, right? Wasn't that what would happen with even like a Patrisse Cullors? You're more familiar with her than I am, so I'm just asking. I don't know, how would she respond to that?
I don't know. I feel like they swim in both camps then.
Yeah.
Because I definitely see new Marxists, like the younger generations, having calls for my truth, because it's all, and this is anyone who participates in some of these conversations or in some of these cultural circles. It is a my truth thing. That's where we get microaggressions from. It is it's a my truth, but they don't reject microaggressions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so this is where, of course, all these things are squishy. All these things are they bleed over. People draw where they like to draw from, what's convenient for the moment. But even the concept of microaggressions, as it's taught, are based on what a group of people are told they should believe or how they should respond. So yeah, it's you're feeling aggressed, you're feeling violated personally, but you're told you have to feel that way. If you look at the list of microaggressions, right? So if I, as a white guy, ask an Asian kid in my class, hey, can you help me with my math homework? The assumption is I am a racist, I'm microaggressing them because I'm a white guy, so I could only be possibly asking because I assume that all Asians are good at math. That is the offense that I'm making. But that assumes that as a white person, I have no individual truth, that I belong to a class of people, and that individual I offended belongs to a class of people, and that truth is determined by which class of people I belong to. So in that sense, my truth would be rejected. I didn't mean anything by it. I actually just saw that, like, hey, I saw he got an A on his paper. I looked at, I saw the A, I saw my F. So I said, hey, could you help me? Had nothing to do. I didn't care if he was purple or pink. I saw an A on his paper. They said, well, it doesn't matter what you thought. It doesn't matter why you asked. Your asking is itself the offense. Does that make sense? At least that's where I'm thinking of how it overrides. I think the critical theories eventually override. They allow for the my truth to exist as long as it doesn't violate the synthetic tribal truth.
Yes, I do agree with that. I do agree. Do you have anything else you want to offer on the critical theories? Or would you like to move into Islamic theism?
I would just add that critical theories, they're all going to privilege something. So remember, there's critical race theory, there's critical gender theories, there's critical every theory, right? So everybody's going to privilege something within their group of people that they think is their primary, their ultimate truth fountain. It's one of the reasons why I just see this view eating their own, because eventually what my group's truth is doesn't align with your group's truth is. And even though I say gays for Palestine, eventually somebody's not gonna be happy when those two groups meet, right?
Well, I think you bring up a good transition point, and I'll ask you our question about race at the end for both of these topics. But we are going to look at Islamic theism, but there is a critical theory for Islam. There's critical Muslim theory or critical Islamic theory. And from what I understand, I haven't done any reading on it, but there's also critical Palestinian theory. And so that one I am like, it's just been a part of a conversation, but I've done reading on critical Muslim theory or critical Islamic theory. And so I think that it's very interesting that postmodernism would, bleed right into the conversation on Islamic theism. So can you give us an overview of what is Islamic theism? How do we differentiate that from Christian theism or Christianity?
So Islamic theism, of course, that's going to be under that big family tree of worldviews underneath supernaturalism. There is a personal God within Islamic theism. That personal God is monotheistic, certainly as Christianity or Judaism would be. So Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are the three great monotheistic religions. But whereas Christianity and Judaism are far more compatible because Christians see Judaism as true in terms of the Old Testament. Structure, we just say that Jews have not accepted Christ as Messiah, but we're still worshiping the same God, Yahweh. The blessing, the promise comes from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But Islam, so you get Muhammad who comes along in the 6th century, and then you're saying, well, hey, the Arab peoples get traced back to not Isaac, but Ishmael. Sire doesn't deal with this in the book, which I was a little disappointed because I think that history is really important for us, especially as we understand the conflict as it is today. So Ishmael inherits the promise of Yahweh. And so the blessing to Abraham comes through Ishmael. Ishmael is considered the father of the Arab peoples. And so Islam is the true religion. The idea is that all people are born Muslim. Everybody is born sort of good as a good Muslim. And it's only because the world is corrupt or there's things that take us away from accepting Allah as the one true God that we move away from our birth nature as followers of Allah. But that's kind of the starting point there.
Because it is monotheistic, how do those who ascribe to Islam see the human person? Is there still intrinsic dignity, value, and worth?
I do think that they would see humans as the highest creation. There is some crossover between Christianity and Islam in terms of the humans have sort of a value. But I do think that value as the highest creation tends to be tied to obedience to the laws of Islam. So our value is connected to our obedience. But if I'm rejecting those things, then I lose my value. And I can be killed, I can be wiped out or anything like that because I'm not living up to my potential that I was created to live in.
Yes.
So I wouldn't say it's intrinsic in that sense. Not in the same way as Christians would see it as intrinsic worth.
I would definitely say that it is workspace adjacent in a way, in that this is where I think when I hear of things like jihad and access to Allah and things like that, when you practice a jihad or are killed or something like that, that is the part of the value of the human that I hear you talking about. Whereas on the contrary, if I were to walk away from Islam and become a Christian, my value would be nothing. I would be worthy of death. Yeah.
It's far more instrumental value than intrinsic value. At least if we're going to put it on a spectrum. Again, some could argue is it there or not? And Sire kind of points out some of there might be disagreement in some places. But if we're going to put it on a spectrum, it's way across the spectrum towards instrumental value. If there is some intrinsic, it's not clear that makes a whole heck of a lot of difference if you rebel.
What then about death? Like, is there heaven and hell?
Yeah, so there definitely looks like there's a eternity that's heaven or hell. I think those concepts, cross over fairly well, it sounds like. You're in paradise, which they would say heaven is paradise, right? For eternity, or your eternity in hell. So very similar, because, of course, Muhammad was familiar with some of the Old Testament stuff and even in some Christianity because he comes much later.
If Islam is monotheistic and there's understanding of like the Old Testament scriptures and some of Christianity, how does Islam view morality?
Yeah, so the three sort of authoritative traditions, or I don't want to say scriptures in the sense because it might be misleading, but you have the Quran, which is the authoritative book, the people of the book, right? That's it's a book that exists in eternity with Allah, with God. Muhammad sort of transcribes that eternal book. Then there's the written traditions about the sayings of Muhammad himself, as Muhammad is the greatest and final prophet. So his life and his sayings are in the hadith. Those are authoritative. When Muhammad took certain actions, those become prescriptive, right? So Christians would look at the Old Testament and say, okay, Abraham goes into Egypt and he says, hey, my wife's beautiful. I don't want him to kill me. I'll pretend she's sister and stuff. So Christians look at it, well, that's descriptive of history, but doesn't mean it's prescriptive about what is morally right to do. So for Islam, though, Muhammad's actions are prescriptive. So they look at his life and his teachings. That becomes morally authoritative. And then there's the Sunnah, which is the third sort of group of authoritative, again, I'm going to say loosely scriptures. I don't think that's the right word. It's not the same as a Christian sense, so I think it might be misleading to use that. But they're an authoritative body of work that are based off sort of the traditions that surround Muhammad and Islam itself. And that's where you get Sharia law. It's the sort of judicial stuff. It's trying to say what is the law of how we act in a certain moment in a certain time. But for Islam, it's very legalistic. It's very legal centered. It's law centered. There is clarity. There is absolute clarity on what laws are based on those three sources. And that becomes how you do everything, what you eat, what you wear, what you adorn yourself with. That becomes the final director of moral authority.
If that becomes the director of moral authority, then I'm assuming it lays out all of life's core commitments.
Again, I'm no scholar in this area, but as far as I understand, all of the core commitments, like you talk about the 5 pillars of Islam, the core commitments that everyone has to do, whether confess that Allah alone He is God, the prayers, the certain acts of the almsgiving, the visit to Mecca at least once in your lifetime. There's certain core commitments there. There's certainly, again, in your obligations to how you should treat the non-believer, the non-Muslim. There are certain very clear directives on how that should be. Somebody can either convert, or if they don't, they have to pay alms. If I as a Christian were living in a Muslim country, I might have to pay, at least in theory, pay a tax, so to speak, a non-believer tax, right? And then they'll let me live amongst them freely. So there's things that guide all of life.
Okay. How do you see the postmodern view, or I don't want to necessarily call it a full worldview, but the ideology or the framework of postmodernism and the world's view of Islam coming to bear in our current culture on the conversation of race?
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. And I was thinking about this. Again, I think if we go from historic Islam, right? Not the Western colonized version of critical Islamic theory that the UK invented so that they can steal somebody else's religion. I'm saying it that way, but I'm just pushing some buttons here.
Yes, you are.
I know. Again, send your comments to Monique at the center.
There we go.
I think for Muhammad, the idea that the Arab peoples were the chosen peoples, the Jewish peoples, the existence of those people is an affront, is an offense, because they are from a different line claiming to have the inheritance of God. So there's a religious sort of connection to that ethnic difference for Islam. And so this is why you get, the chants from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It's not just that Israel is bad, it's that the Jews are bad. The Jews are an affront. And so this is where you can read in certain Islamic doctrinal statements the idea that, there'll come a time in the end where the Jew will hide from persecution, and even the rocks and the trees, they'll cry out, oh, Muslim, here's the Jew hiding behind me, come kill them. So it's not just the state of Israel that is an offense to who receives the inheritance of God's promise. It's the people, the ethnos Jew, who their existence inhibits the coming of paradise, so to speak, right? So to kill the Jewish person proves that Islam is true, that Judaism is false, and this, sort of, I guess, in a sense, ushers in this time of paradise, in the sense of, like, if I die, to be a martyr, the only way to guarantee that you will enter paradise one of those ways is to be a martyr. So, if I go and blow myself up in Israel, on a bus full of children, well, that's good because I've eliminated the impure ethnos that doesn't reflect, that has tried to hide or conceal the truth of Islam. So then it goes beyond race in that sense. There's a religious component, there's a political component to it. So it's hard to make it purely a race issue as we see race, but it would be an ethnic component that's tied to those political and religious existences. That's sort of the big distinction. Then you get into your critical theories. Of course, everything is going to be about race. Everything for the critical theorists, critical race theorists especially, has to be race-based.
I mean, even among the writings, like the journal articles and things like that in like academic journals about critical Islam or critical Muslim theories, more critical Islam, there is a definite rejection of the West, a definite rejection of, Western thought. I have an article up now that even talks about, the West wants to do this, but it's like they're trying to pave a new way almost, or trying to figure out how to make this dance work. Can there be a critical theory for Islam? I know there's a whole center, but like you're saying, that's in the UK, not in Saudi Arabia,
it's
or
in the West.
Yeah. So
yeah. Well, I would love to see them go found that center in the heart of Iran.
It wouldn't work because of critical theories. When you look at someone like Kendi, who has never out and out said that he's a critical theorist or critical race theorist or anything like that, to my knowledge, but he does espouse a lot of the tenets of it. He will, in How to Be an Anti-Racist, he says you can't be anti-racist without being all of these other things, much of which are, damned in Islam and can, you can be sentenced to death for. So I don't think they've thought that part all the way through. It'll come. It'll get through.
No, I think they have. See, that's the actually thing is where I disagree a little bit with that narrative, is because I think they have thought it through very clearly. I think they are well aware that, when you have your Queers for Palestine, they know that if they went to Palestine, they'd be thrown off the roofs by Hamas, right? They would kill them, right? They know that. At least the people espousing the theories. Now, the people holding the signs in the streets, they may not be so bright, but
I'm talking about the people who hold the signs in the streets.
Yeah, they may not be so bright, but the theorists behind it, they do know that. They understand that, but they don't care, because it's sort of like Sun Tzu in The Art of War. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And they ultimately believe this is where if they were honest, I think they'd have to say what they ultimately believe is that Islam too, once they are freed of the oppressor, Western, Christian, whatever, that they'll eventually come around to seeing things. I think maybe they're naive in a sense, but I think they believe that they will, hey, we're going to found the center and you'll see that we're really on the same side here. You just got to come and see it our way. And I think that they're either naive or, but I don't think they're unaware. I just think that they just truly buy into their ideas. Now, that's the theorists that are running the show. You look at Franz Fanon, I'll point back to him. His book was The Wretched of Society. But he talks about the liberation from oppression and the need for violence that supports that, right? And so he's very clear that the only way to decolonize is to turn the violence of the oppressor back on them, right? That's what decolonization means. So when here in the West, we're out, hey, decolonize the Palestine, Israel is the colonizer. It's because they see them tied to the West, tied to America. Yep. And that means violence is the only solution to throwing off the oppressor. And that ties back clearly. So that's why they're celebrating the streets. That's why they ally with them, because they believe if they can destroy the structures, the institutional structures of the West, then we will reach this liberation point, a tipping point. Now, it may require another time of the new thesis would be, okay, Islam comes to power, and now they're the oppressor. Okay, well, then we have that's the thesis. We have a new antithesis. Then we have a new synthesis. So they believe that as you go through the cycle of violence, that eventually that you can achieve this utopia. But it's okay with them if that cycle of violence for now leads to an Islamic theocracy in the Middle East. That's still better. It's progress away from the Western oppressor. So it's still good. So they know that that might happen. They just don't care because they believe that that's part of the solution, is to go through the time of violence and the new oppression.
This is so much, and we could talk about it for the rest of the day because it's so much. Like we haven't even hit on how this really is an outflow of, critical religion or critical religious studies. And I know Esmar he said critical religion with a question mark. And yes, critical religion is a theory all by itself that sees Christianity as being oppressive to other religious minorities. He says, is that a new one, or is it not as well known as other critical theories? I would say, but I read about this all the time. So it might not be as, prevalent or in the common culture as things like critical race theory, when we had so much conversation about that. But I see critical religion or critical religious studies in many places, especially as people have these conversations of Christians, we don't want to be oppressive, or Christians are oppressive, or, we need to change Christianity to fit into this. Well, the conversation about changing Christianity happens because we are seen as being oppressive by and large. And I know that's a broad brush stroke, but it is the conversation of Christianity being oppressive toward religious minorities. So think of Jews, Hindus, Muslims, anyone who does not espouse to not evangelicalism. What's the other word? I feel like it starts with a P.
Protestantism?
Protestantism. Yeah. So with that's our time, friend. That went by very quickly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us. Joe, thank you for sharing your time with us today. I appreciate you. You guys, please share this out with your friends. If you have not subscribed to our channels, our YouTube channel or our Facebook page, please subscribe, like, and share this out. We will talk with you again. Bye.
That's it for part 5 of our 6-part series on Sire's book, The Universe Next Door. You can find out more information on the book and about Monique in the show notes. And I hope you'll come back and join us for the next episode, where we raise the roof on 20th century thinking and develop a Christian worldview for the 21st century. In the meantime, don't forget to follow and rate the show on your favorite podcasting service. And if you want to participate with me in a subscribers-only question and answer, you can sign up through my website, morethancake.org.